Rock soup, this pooling together of the assets on hand to create a scrumptious new whole. There's so much awesome in the concept. The Vietnamese have a saying, a grief shared by many is half a grief. A joy shared is twice a joy. Imagine sharing our joys and woes, our stories, in a great community pot. People can throw their stories in, building to a comprehensive community story, amplifying joy, diminishing grief, pulling us together in celebration of the story. All it really takes is people ready to share, to toss their stories in, and someone willing to listen. Do you know what's really cool? It's already started. I stop a stranger on the street and tell them about my mission to unite the community through story. They seem interested and wish me well. Next comes the ask. So would you like to share your story? A look crosses their face. Something between a guffaw and a whimper comes out. I don't have anything worth sharing. But wait. So there was this time. 10 minutes later, I walk down the street, stop another stranger. The same thing happens. The easiest way to get around this is to not ask about stories, but to pinpoint specific topics. What's your favorite thing about Rochester? Who was your idol growing up, and why? But even using that intimidating word, story, people still come around if you smile through those beats. Everyone has a story. We don't want to think that we're interesting, but we recognize the need and desire to share our experiences. Each and every person in the Rock has a story, and I'm working on using those to make our city and our world a better place. The big question is, why stories? Telling stories is an essential part of being human. Stories of hunts in the caves of Lascaux informed tribal members and visitors in the future about what worked and what didn't. Travelers from realm to realm in the medieval era would tell stories to show that they had common concerns and interests, and to confirm that they were not an enemy. Stories help our children to understand the lessons we have learned from the past. Our brains are constantly constructing stories. It's how our memories are built. Stories help to assemble the data coming in from various senses at different speeds into one coherent whole. We are made of stories. So why stories? It's how we operate. And it's the most natural way to open ourselves up to understanding something new. Or understanding that something new isn't so new after all. I am a storyteller. And by that I mean I gather and share stories. Let me paint the picture of a storyteller by telling you about a great and wise king in a land long ago and far away. This king loved puzzles, and he issued a challenge to see if anyone could best him. Shortly afterwards, a package arrived at the castle. Inside were 3 dolls and the message, "O king, if you are so clever as you maintain, please be so wise as to tell the difference between these 3 dolls." The king examined the dolls very carefully. They were exactly the same, down to the tiniest details. He stroked his long beard and thought carefully. He decided to bring in his 3 advisors, a wise man, a fool, and a storyteller, to help him solve the riddle. The wise man thought the whole question was a waste of time, but he was wise after all, and so he said nothing. "Ooh, dollies!" cried the fool. "Let's have a tea party." Presented with the dolls, the storyteller said, "Majesty, you cannot see the difference between these dolls. That must mean that the difference lies within." "Yes, yes," said the king. "How do we determine what that difference is?" Now, there are many ways to reach inside a person. I am most familiar with doing so through the ears. Pardon me. And he leaned forward and yoinked 3 long hairs from the king's beard. "Hey!" shouted the king. But the storyteller was already lifting the first doll and threading the first hair into its ear. It went in and in and in and kept going until it was gone. This doll is a wise man. What it hears, it keeps to itself. Storyteller lifted the second doll and took the second hair and threaded it into its ear. It went in and in, but as he was putting it in one ear, it started to come out the other. This doll is obviously a fool. "What about the third?" asked the king. Storyteller lifted the third doll and took the third hair, started to thread it into its ear. It went in and in and in, and it didn't come out the other side, but it didn't entirely stay in either. Instead, it started to slowly come out of the doll's mouth. Majesty, this doll is a storyteller. What it hears, it eventually tells. I plan to take the superpower of stories, the clarity that they lend, and use it to bring us all closer together. Everyone putting their part into the soup, finding those ready to share and connecting them to those willing to listen. Consider just a few examples of stories already making connections across our community. The Human Library. Participants are human books that can be checked out by visitors who get to sit and hear their stories and ask questions. It's a great way to break down walls and learn about something you knew nothing about before. The Icarus Sessions. Participants get to share their art and tell brief stories about making it and the struggles and victories that they encountered along the way. Events like TEDx, like today, or those hosted by Flower City or Allendale Columbia, or any of our salons. A great way to hear stories about ideas here at home. In 2013, I started a project called Rochester Stories. I wanted to get people excited about Rochester and give them a perspective on the differences and similarities in our stories. I started out by gathering stories from people all over the city. I tried a couple of different ways of doing this, but the most successful by far was setting up a table at the public market. The crowds drawn to the market from all over our area allowed me to reach people who I would have struggled to find on my own. I supplemented those stories with historical accounts of the city, like stories of Rattlesnake Pete and the Farmer's Inn in James Vick. A selection of the 35 to 40 final stories were transcribed and given to actors to memorize. These were then performed at the 2013 First Niagara Rochester Fringe Festival. An actor would retell the story, and then a photo of the story owner with their name and neighborhood would appear on the screen. Several of the owners were also in the audience, and they stood up at the end of the show so that people could identify them for conversations during the post session. We also had the cast share some of their stories. The audience was excited and energized. Through the stories that they heard, they felt part of a greater whole that was Rochester, and this was very cool. They had tasted the soup and liked what was there. The project continued this year. For 2014, I went to soup kitchens and refugee programs to expand my base. The show was another success and left the audience wanting more stories. So I'm working to provide that by looking at new venues and looking into new media opportunities as well. So stay tuned. I'm also approaching after-school programs and classroom settings, including the Brainery. I want to get kids and adults excited not only about sharing their own stories, but about listening to, gathering, and retelling the stories of those around them. Such a program can increase empathy, increase pride in neighborhoods in the city, enhance verbal skills, and more. I want to gather stories and share them at each and every opportunity, working to build Rochester into a better place. And from Rochester, I want to take this movement and spread it to the country and the world, connecting those ready to share with those willing to listen and strengthening communities through it. So what does this all mean for you? Each of you has a vegetable you can add to the soup. You all have stories of your own that are valuable and worth sharing and important for people in the community. Pay attention to the stories around you. Realize the impact they can have when they're shared and used to break down the walls around us. Retell the stories you hear along with your own. Help others to realize they're not alone. Seek out sharing communities or start some of your own. I can help you to build off of my approach, or you can just get some people together and encourage them to share. Let's think of our Rochester as a community, as the soup, not just random ingredients in pantries across the area.